So I have the review packet up there, and I can't get rid of that. Oh, it's so annoying.
Making sure that they're
Well, I don't want that up there. Okay, whatever. All right, so on the review packet, if everyone goes to page 9. On page 9, it starts with the GI Bill of Rights and goes through McCarthyism. So that's this next little bit of reading, and that's from chapter 26 in the review book. So we're going to the review book. And then you look at the rest of the page, that's on 27 of the review book. So I am assigning 26 and 27. These are the terms you need to know. Most of these I will cover in class. The ones I do not cover in class, then those are the ones you're responsible for. Everyone got that? And then the next chapter, the next page will be 29. And then 27, or 28, I'm sorry, and 29. I should add that 27 is a big chapter. One more thing. You are assigned the last page. If you ever look at the last page, that is homework. I have assigned that a while ago. Page 11. Page 11. Is that page 11, right?
Yeah.
My memory serves correct? Chapter, and so that's the one you have to do. In fact, let me do this real quick. This one is going to be in your review book, basically chapters 30 and 31 of your review. And so go through these on your own, and they've never really asked questions, anything outside of those on the AP exam. 5% of the AP exam is on 1980 and beyond, so I try to do a comprehensive up to 1980, and then the last bit you got to do on your own. And I will take some time in review sessions, and I'll figure out something. I'll help you as much as I can on this last page too. Sound good? All right, let's go take your notes out. And I don't know how to get rid of that. I don't know why that aggravates me so much, but I don't want that thing up there. Why doesn't it leave? I have no idea how I got it, but it popped up, and now I know how to get rid of it. I've learned something new. All right, did we get, what two countries did Truman claim are about ready to fall under communist influence? Yeah, Greece and Turkey. And what became the policy to try to stop communist expansion, containment? And what was Truman's policy statement called? I already gave you a big hint, half of it. Yeah, the Truman Doctrine. And what is it called? If one country falls to communism, all its neighbors will fall. Yeah, the domino effect or the domino theory. And every communist revolt is led by what person? Stalin, or the Kremlin, where the seat of government is after Stalin dies, which I don't know if Stalin will ever die. We don't know. We're still not sure. In late 1940s, it seemed like that guy will live forever. And all of a sudden, but do we get to domestic politics? So we got this.
This is what we saw. National Security.
Yeah. So military spending. All right. Did we just mention National Security Act?
We got right.
I can't emphasize enough what a big deal this would be for politics. Every politician from now on has got to say, I am not soft on communism. And this is going to be a real problem because the Republicans will use it first, red baiting, but then the Democrats will jump right back in and say, you don't want to build that unnecessary military project. You don't want to build a garbage bomber like the B-58. You're soft on communism. Or the B-1. Or the B-2. Planes that have no real function. You're soft on communism. So the National Security Act. Then we'll have to create this new state. Because if we're going to have to worry where the communists are, we have to know. So before World War, or before 1947, there were 2 cabinet-level departments for the military. Washington created the Department of War, and the Adams administration during the Quasi-War created the Department of the Navy. They combined those and added 1 new branch of the armed forces into 1 Department of Defense. So they included the Army, Navy, and Air Force. The thought was 1 Department of Defense, they won't fight each other. Know what that meant now? Instead of 2 people fighting each other, now it's 3 services fighting each other. And the Marines are part of the Navy. And like I've told you before, have some fun with a former Marine. Remind them they're part of the Navy. You have fun, you have a good time. Don't do that.
You'll come back in one piece.
Potentially. So they also created a National Security Council of all the leading foreign policy advisors for national security. And so this is going to be like a cabinet level council within the cabinet. So that's Secretary of State and Defense and all these new operations. And there'll be a national security advisor, a new position created for the president to accumulate all the massive amounts of national security information. And there are times this position will have a great amount of power and influence over the president. Then, hey, who are the communists? Where are they? We gotta find them. How do you find them? We need spies, covert operations. I don't know why I put another arrow there, but we do have another arrow. We gotta figure out who the commies are. The United States had no basic espionage operation. Sure, there was a Navy intelligence, Army intelligence. The State Department gathered intelligence, but nothing really that went out and looked for this kind of information. And so, 2 new massive spy operations. And I should add, these are covert operations. By definition, they have to be what? Secret. So that's, I think, what I was going to write in big letters, secret. So you add secret. They got to be secret. You can't tell a potential enemy this is how we're spying on you, because they'll change what they're doing. Secret. And that means secret from not just our potential enemies, but secret from whom else? Who else? Us. We have no idea what they do, except spend lots of money. Wow, do they spend money. The first one they created, the one that's most famous, the CIA. And the CIA would come out of the Office of Strategic Services, and kind of this umbrella spy operation from World War II. And they had a lot of learning to do. The CIA would bumble a lot of things, but these are spies. What do you call spying and gathering information? What is the word for that? Remember espionage, yeah? Now, they, by law, are not supposed to commit like sabotage or assassinations. They can only gather information. But these are spies on the ground or intelligent gathering information on the ground. So only espionage, and where can they spy? What part of the world? Anywhere outside the borders of the United States. Did everyone got that? They can't spy inside the borders of the United States. Now that's a gray area. What about somebody from outside the United States they're spying on contact somebody inside the United States? They would never exploit that gray area. Nothing to see here, move on. Meaning, how soon do you suppose the CIA will be spying in the United States? Not quite immediately. It would take a couple years. Give them a little bit of credit. Yes, the CIA would start spying, and how would we know? Because it's secret. And then an even bigger and even more secretive operation would be called the National Security Agency, the NSA. And this one we even know less about. They're the ones who gather so much electronic intelligence. They're the ones who will try to gather everything they can from radio intercepts, and then eventually communication intercepts, wiretap, and now, of course, everything they can to sponge the internet clean of information. They're the ones who read your email. Let me rephrase that. They don't read your email. They gather your email. And if they don't read your email until they decide to read your email. You catch my drift on that. If there's something they need to find out about you, that's when they read your email. Yeah, so they gather everything. Potential, but we don't know. And we don't know what they read because what? It's secret. It is secret. And these powers are going to be greatly expanded after September 11th. The CIA was not supposed to carry out assassinations. They assassinate people all the time. Very brutally with drones. Meaning with missiles. Meaning they kill innocent people all the time. Including, there's been a number of times where they've killed American citizens with assassination. But anyways, yes. In what? Oh yeah, it just happened in your lifetime. 2 American citizens, there was a cleric from the United States who went to Iraq after the Iraq War in 2011, 2012. And the United States, they decided all secretly that he was involved in terrorist activities, and so they decided to kill him. He was an American citizen. And in the process of this, using what's called a Hellfire missile, they killed his son, who was your age, who was visiting him from Washington State. Yeah. Yeah, that's in your lifetime. So yes, it happens. And this is part of the reason why they did not want any of this. But one more thing about this. If you're going to spy outside the borders, which pretty soon the CIA is going to be spying within the borders of the United States, and nobody will know because it's all secret except for a tiny little group. Who's going to spy? This is by default. It's not part of the law. But who will spy on Americans inside the country? That's where the FBI comes in. They would do domestic. Is that what you said?
No.
Who did you say?
I said that at the beginning.
The FBI. And so the FBI would begin to spy on suspected communists. And they would start gathering secret files on everybody and just gather information on anybody who's suspected to be a communist. And their paranoid leader of the FBI, J. Edgar Hoover, just assumed everybody who didn't agree with him was a communist. And so, for example, they really went after the civil rights movement. The FBI spied and harassed Martin Luther King on virtually everything he did. Yes.
Is this Jigger related to Herbert?
No, just happens to have the same name. And in fact, in 1962, the FBI would send Martin Luther King a letter and telling him, we have dirt on you about things you have done. Commit suicide. And that's what the FBI, the US government, told Martin Luther King to do. Now, he just assumed, I know they have dirt on him. And, yeah. But, that gives you an idea what was going on. This became covert. And the big thing is they started gathering files. Most of them were released in 1976. You can go look at these files and they're kind of shocking. All the just dirt they gathered on people, all in secret. And nobody knew exactly what they had. They had a file. So I literally just looked at, because someone asked me about it, I looked at the file the FBI took on the Hall of Fame quarterback for the New York Jets in the 1960s and 70s, Joe Namath. And J. Edgar Hoover didn't like it, so they gathered information on him because he might be a communist spy. No, he was just a quarterback with bad knees. But here's the thing about information and what gives you power. If you don't know what they have on you, but you know they're gathering information, how do you act? Don't. No. You are very cautious, aren't you? And you're very worried about what they have. I mean, has anyone ever done to you something like just walk up to you and said, I heard you did?
And then walk away.
I heard.
Or I heard what I heard.
By the way, how do you feel right now? You know I'm joking, but even that little bit, right? Like, what do you know? I mean, it could just be us. You went to second period. But that's power. Everybody acts a little bit differently. But what we created out of this was something brand new. This is a radical shift that started with the total war thinking of the Truman Doctrine, a national security state. A state now that is geared in continuous total war at a low scale, where they're spying on their own people and we have no idea what this secret covert government is doing. But the presidential powers skyrocketed. Everything I mentioned here, the CIA, the NSA, the FBI, and this expanded military, all under the power of the President of the United States. But not just that, the President, in this law, it states that there must be certain warlike powers the President must take without a declaration of war. And the logic was in 1948 very simple. So when the Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, there was no threat to the United States, immediate threat to the actual borders of the US yet. Remember, Hawaii was still a colony. But by 48, they could envision waves of Soviet bombers flying over the Arctic. That's the fastest way to get to the US. And we detect them, which, by the way, we had no way to detect them if they're coming over the Arctic. We probably wouldn't be able to detect them in 1948, 1949. If the Soviets had bombers that could do that, until they got to southern Canada. So how long would we have to react? Soviet bombers, potentially with nuclear weapons. How long would we have? We'd have a couple hours back then. Is that enough time to call Congress for a declaration of war?
No.
The president has got to act. So that was logical. Think about it when you have 15 years later, when Soviet intercontinental ballistic missiles are detected over the Arctic. How long do we have? 20 minutes, 15 to 20 minutes. That's why beginning in the 1960s, you see usually an Air Force officer carrying a very heavy and awkward briefcase. It's really heavy, so they practice on not leaning over. And inside that briefcase, what's in there? All the nuclear launch codes. They call it the football. So the president can launch the weapons immediately. It's a little bit more complex than that, but yes. And so hopefully we have a stable president. Roll the die, right? So, also now there's a veil of secrecy. That's me being officious. That's what we do all on that. Actually, there's a few men that go. Joe Biden, Vladimir Putin, all the different sides. No.
They all are officers. Yeah. It's true.
Yeah, suppose they literally put in the transmit, and they transmit to every missile silo every missile silo is connected to a pod about 7 or 8, and then inside that one spot, you got two Air Force officers that have to transmit.
It's on the department. It's on their website.
No, I know. They all have. I know how they do it. I know how they do it, and they would do it because that's what this is. Yeah. Okay, so there's a veil of secrecy now. We have a shadow government that operates and no one has any idea. In fact, this is what they feared way back in the founding of the United States. But actually, in the Constitution, it does not say the president is commander-in-chief during peacetime. Congress did that because it would make more sense. There has to be a shadow government. There has to be a shadow government if you're going to do covert operations. And once you have a shadow government, we have no idea what goes on inside that government. It is secret. And so they can operate in various ways. And justify this, you might have heard this term. It comes from this law called national security. National security. Well, national security would be the justification for secrecy. We can't tell you because of national security. We can't tell you because it's part of an ongoing espionage operation or whatever it might be. So a certain president we have, his name was Richard Nixon. He wanted to assure a victory by essentially rigging an election in 1972. And so what he did is he sent operatives into the Democratic National Committee headquarters in a really ugly hotel called the Watergate Hotel. And they were going to put wiretaps and bugs to bug the Democratic National Committee headquarters. And they were busted because they were incompetent fools. But Nixon covered it up by saying it's national security. It's an NSA CIA operation, we can't tell you. And he was able to cover that up for about 6 months. And that allowed him to win a big victory. And then it would begin to blow up in what we named after the ugly hotel that's still there, Watergate. And that is why Nixon would eventually resign, even though it was close, in 1974. He probably would have made it. Nothing would happen to him if he wouldn't have been recording his Oval Office conversations. So, national security. We had another president about 20 years after that went to hide an extramarital affair with national security. That was Bill Clinton. And right now, for the Supreme Court, that is part of an argument being used by former President Trump to justify his actions on January 6th, right now in front of the Supreme Court, by saying it is part of the presidential privilege and national security that a president's actions while president are never illegal. No, that's what they're arguing right now at this moment. That's what they're arguing at this moment in front of the Supreme Court. You should read the arguments. It's happening right now. Next, let's move on. But the important part is you see how national security can be used. That's my point. It can be used for us. What's that? And so that's what he's arguing. The president can do whatever. Well, actually, that's not true. States can prosecute federal officials. States are not. It's not the same. So what we're talking about here is for federal law. We have a weird system of federalism. And the United States began what's called the Selective Service Act. The Selective Service Act, the United States initiated the draft. Everyone got this? The first time in peacetime, the U.S. began drafting soldiers. Why? Hey, if we might have to face enemies abroad, we must have an army ready. Now, it wasn't the lottery system that was used in World War I and World War II during wartime. It was basically local draft boards they get a quota and they just would pick from a pool of potential draftees. And so, for example, they had a lot of exceptions. If you went to college, you wouldn't be drafted. If you were married, you wouldn't be drafted in this early draft. So just a small increase in the size of the army. So, for example, a few years after this, my dad was playing football at this little school in Nebraska, blew his knee out and had to take a year off, and he napped it, and he was drafted. And so he's in the army, and he ended up going to Germany, an occupation. That's kind of what happened to him. He had to take a year off, and yeah. So these are all the American presidents under the National Security Act in the Cold War. And these creepy pencil drawings, I thought I would just kind of creep you out with that. They kind of creep you out. So everybody from Truman to, let's go through. Truman, who's this? Who's this?
Johnson.
Lyndon Johnson.
Nixon. Ford. Carter.
Known for his big smile.
Reagan. Bush.
George H.W. Bush. Yeah. And so, but while this is going on, the United States would attack a different way. This is all kind of military. The most successful of these programs in this early Cold War was economic. Economic aid called the Marshall Plan, named after the Secretary of State, former 5-star General George Marshall, right here, who Truman brought in during his Secretary of State, Burns, trying to be kind of a disaster. And this was the rebuilding of Western Europe. They offered it to the Soviets if Stalin got rid of his Stalinist government. Of course, he's not going to do that. But the important thing is, it's not just Western Europe. It's also the the Allied occupation zone of Germany. And this would lead to money going to Japan to help them rebuild. The idea was, if we're going to avoid another situation like after World War I, we have to help our allies rebuild their economy. Truman asked for $48 billion. He got 12. Was he happy? Yeah. He asked for a lot more than what he wanted. He got a little bit less than what he wanted, but this is a significant amount. And this was so places like France, Belgium and the western part of Germany and Japan would not become communist or fascist. And what type of economic system did every one of these countries in Western Europe and Japan occupy or began? Was it trickle-down economics or was it Keynesian economics? Everybody adopted Keynesian economics. Every single one adopted it. I should add, Britain would go to trickle-down in 1980, 81, the same time the United States did. Most of Western Europe and Japan are still Keynesian. Yes. So once the United States began giving money to Western Europe and Western part of Germany, it opened the door to giving additional aid to Japan.
The U.S.
Yes. So the U.S. helped Japan rebuild. With the idea being, we won't have the problems after the war. This is kind of unprecedented. Remember, the United States helped destroy these countries during the war as part of a total war, and then they helped rebuild them. Did it work? It was shockingly successful. Soon they'll be talking about the European or the German miracle and then the Japanese miracle in their economic growth. It would accelerate to be a big noticeable difference between, and you still see it today, the western part of Germany and the eastern part. Go to Berlin and cross over. You can, where the wall dividing line was, it's noticeable. And this became a big market for American goods. Where are they going to buy their stuff to rebuild their country? They're going to buy it. They're going to buy it from the United States. And so this will be an economic program for the US. So this is Berlin in 46. Just a ruin. And that's London after the war. So I'm a big Beatles fan. I was looking at some, I was looking at Beatles pictures. I was looking at some that Paul McCartney took. And it was pictures of them walking around London. And they're still walking around ruins in London, and it was 1963 from the war. Just to give you an idea of the devastation. That's one of those, God, you know, these, it's just amazing to me. So we're jumping right to here. All of this is going to lead to, you could argue, this is when you can't go back to the Cold War, the Berlin blockade. And let's get to why it happened. The Berlin blockade, okay, the French, US, and UK zones, soon to be known as West Germany, they needed a common currency. The four-power agreement wasn't working. And you can't have economic growth until you have a common financial system. So they created the Deutschmark, the mark. So the first time I went to Germany, they were still using marks. And the Deutschmark would be their currency. Now, all they said is, we're going to get rid of the script, the currency that the occupation army used, and all these areas are one currency. They didn't announce it, but everybody, especially Stalin, knew what that meant. You cannot, a country cannot have a currency unless they have a government. They need a strong government with laws to regulate their money. So what they're doing in reality is creating a West Germany. This will create a West Germany. Everyone knew it. It's a government. And actually, they would pick this little tiny town on the Rhine River called Bonn and name that the capital, with the idea being wherever unified, we'll go back to Berlin. So if you ever go to Bonn today, there's all these massive empty government buildings from the really rich and powerful country of West Germany. They're all just kind of there. It's kind of surreal. They're all, you know, they keep them immaculate, but they're just half empty. They're just weird. And so Stalin freaked out, absolutely freaked out. And so he, in response, fully blockaded the land routes into the Allied occupation zones of Berlin. So the French, the British, and the Americans each had, on roughly this line, a rail, a land, and an air route. So basically an Autobahn and a railroad track, and a railroad, and then air routes. And then in the occupation zones, they each had an airport. Tegel, Gatow, and Tempelhof was the American one. And so this is going to be like the Tempelhof area. Now it's this, they have a big, massive airport. It's this really cool park around this airport. It's a really neat place. They blockaded. What was he trying to do? He's giving the United States, well, Britain and France, but it's the US a choice. Either you get to keep him in Berlin or you get West Germany, you don't get both. His greatest fear was that the Allies would arm Germany and send them back again. And so here is the blockade, and it showed Russian soldiers standing in front of a train trying to get into the occupation zones. Truman, they really took this as an aggressive attack by Stalin to take up West Berlin and maybe the rest of Germany. It actually was an act of absolute desperation because he left the air routes open. And so the Western Allies decided to do an airlift. And they began a long 10-month airlift. Most of the US and British planes the French Air Force was rebuilding, and they all basically did this air corridor. Pretty soon they had it going, just a continuous line of planes, day and night. The transport planes were pretty small, but the US, British, and French would airlift supplies into their occupation zone. Yeah.
Okay, this might be another question, but you said that he left the air.
Yeah, he left them all
How would you close it?
by shooting down.
Oh, okay.
Does that make sense? Yeah.
I was like, what?
Good question. Yeah, good question. And Stalin did not want war. This is part of the reason why the U.S. would pass selective service too. And so the transport planes back then were pretty small. And they could only carry a limited amount. And it's not just food for the couple million in the occupation zones. It's also for the Allied forces, and the big one that no one ever talks about, coal. Coal was the major source of heat, and it's going to be the whole winter of 48, 49, and Berlin can get coal. Coal is really heavy, and it's amazing, but they were able to get enough food for everybody to survive. The Berlin airlift worked better than anyone could have thought, and humiliated Stalin. Here it shows, I like the ones with the kids standing on this. Look at this mountain they're standing on. You see what it is? It's all the rubble from the destruction in Berlin, right by Tempelhof. And what happened is it started with American pilots. They started bringing up little parachutes and throwing candy out to the kids who would watch them come in, the Berlin kids. And that became a thing. So the American, British, and French pilots would give the Berliner kids little bits of chocolate or something, which they didn't have much. And that was huge. I should add, attitudes towards the occupation changed. Nobody likes an occupation army. Do you remember Boston before the Revolutionary War and the Tea Party and the Boston Massacre? Nobody liked the British, French, and American forces in Germany. This would change their attitude a little bit. We might not like them, but they will protect us from the Soviets. So it would change attitudes. And I like this one too, of the Russian bear closing his paws around that one. I like that one. And it worked. It worked better than anyone thought. But one more thing too. It's an election year. And now Truman could look tough on communism without starting World War III. Kind of a big deal. Nobody really wanted World War III except for a few maniacs. And so, part of the airlift would be to airlift children out. And okay, I found a picture of a crow carrying a child, and I just had to give, that's a real picture. Huh? I can't remember what that was from. But I like it. So, Stalin backed down. Stalin did open up the routes, or he backed down. And they wouldn't do anything like this except for minor little things for the rest of the Cold War. But now we can't go back. The Cold War would begin and continue. And American companies, they loved it. As you can see, Boeing advertising, for example, the new C-97 transports, which were built from the B-29 bombers. Because now, Cold War, we make a lot of money with weapons. Yeah.
What's the president for the election year?
True. So true. We got to get to the election right now. So, Cold War is going. And so that's going to dominate much of the post-war. Oh, almost forgot something. In 1949, the United States would create a military alliance. The first peacetime military alliance the United States had ever been in, called the North Atlantic Treaty Organization, or NATO. And by the way, doesn't that sound kind of like peaceful? Oh, we're just for treaties. And this is a massive military alliance of Western Europe and Canada. Eventually, it would be almost all of Europe after the Cold War ended. It's still there. and it is a military alliance. And that's why the United States still has hundreds of thousands of troops in Europe. Most of the American troops, and eventually we would build up. And so when I was your age, there was about 560,000 U.S. troops in West Germany, and about 100,000 in the rest of Europe. And you'll notice what countries will soon be part of NATO. Our former enemy, 10 years later, fascist Spain would be in it. And Turkey would be the only Asian power. In 1955, the Soviets would respond with their military alliance called the Warsaw Pact. And so when I was a kid, it was always NATO versus the Warsaw Pact, and they have numbers of equipment and everything else. And yes, they too allowed East Germany in. Oh, Yugoslavia, Albania was it was weird. They had a very close relationship with the People's Republic of China. It was interesting politics of that era. So the United States now is forever tied to these countries. And we have vowed to come to their defense. So, post-war America, yeah. Oh no, Taiwan is not considered a country. It's not even an island. Technically. I know we don't consider Taiwan a country. Yeah, Taiwan is not a country to the United States. Because the People's Republic of China would never be called Taiwan a country. Yeah, so we don't have an embassy there, for example. They don't have an embassy in the United States. No, we don't have an embassy. You have a consulate, but we don't have an embassy. And so they don't have membership in the United Nations, for example. Yeah, they're not. So the last fragment of the New Deal would pass just at the end of Roosevelt's life over conservative Republican and Democratic opposition, the GI Bill. And the GI Bill, remember, he wanted he wanted some kind of college and tuition for public colleges. Well, he kind of got it. The GI Bill would provide tuition and even more aid down the road to veterans. And this is going to be almost 15 million men and women after the war. So this is just going to fuel a massive expansion of colleges and college education, productivity. A vastly different society will come out of this. Now, we're never going to have that many men and women in uniform at the same time again, but, and also provided housing assistance. To this day, the veterans of the armed forces, this is one of their biggest selling points now that we have a volunteer army. My guess is a lot of you have probably heard this selling point, or if you haven't, you soon will. With a successful career in the United States Armed Forces, you will have most, if not all, of your college paid, especially at public schools. And you will get housing benefits, home mortgage insurance, better than people who are not veterans. This is a big selling point. And there's always been kind of conservative opposition to it, but it's, as you can imagine, incredibly popular. So that's the last vestige of this. Sometimes you see it called, so I put down the GI Bill of Rights in your packet, because Roosevelt was no dummy. You know, the Bill of Rights, everybody remembers that. Oh, we love the Bill of Rights. So he added, the GI Bill of Rights, to make it sound better. That's where you get the GI Bill. Anyone thinking about the armed forces because of this? It's a big deal. GI stands for government issue, and that became slang for American soldiers. World War II. And then Joe is a random American name, so GI Joe means. Yeah. In World War I, they were called doughboys. World War II, GIs. Yeah. I'm sorry, I should have said something. I'm just so, I grew up. I wasn't thinking. Yeah. So thank you for asking. I forgot to say it. Government issue. Next, there was, just like World War I, a post-war depression. Prices were skyrocketing, just like after World War I. They had to switch from military to consumer goods. I never had a GI Joe. All I had was a rock. Huh?
You're the real one instead?
No, I just had a rock.
You just had a rock? Did your rock have a name at least?
Huh?
Did your rock have a name?
Steve.
Steve, oh, good name.
So, Republicans swept the 46 election. Remember I told you this before. Now that's the midterm. For the first time since 1930, Republicans had a majority in both the House and the Senate, and their number one goal was to attack the New Deal. Now, it was difficult to come out and say this. They basically ran against the inflation and Democratic rule they've been in for too long. But they want to get rid of the New Deal. Social Security, they definitely want to get rid of. They want to get rid of the Wealth Tax Act and the high marginal income taxes rates, which by then were 91%. 93%. And they also want to get rid of the regulation on the banks, Glass-Steagall. And what was the law that allowed for labor unions? It was the name of a person. Do you remember? It might begin with a W, part of the New Deal. Say it again. Yeah, the Wagner Act. If you don't remember, jot it down again so you don't forget. That's a big one to know, the Wagner Act. And the Republicans partially repealed the Wagner Act with help of Southern Democrats. They didn't like labor unions for lots of reasons, but partially because they were integrated. It's called the Taft-Hartley Act. And that would be an anti-union bill that would be passed in 1947. And very much anti-union, to make it much more difficult to organize. Otherwise out of order, but it said no sit-down strikes. They also allow for right to work. So to allow for states to pass laws to say that workers at companies with a union didn't have to pay union dues. And here's a cartoon for it. Compulsory unionization, forcing a non-union working man to join the union. Basically what it means is that states with right to work, workers can get all the benefits of the labor union, but they just don't have to pay union dues. And Truman vetoed it. And here's at the Democratic Convention in 48 begging him to veto it. And this would erode labor unions. By the 1980s, when there was a rapidly anti-union president, labor unions began a fast decline, which would be for most of your and much of my life. It appears to be rebounding a little bit, things kind of go up and down. Here is an anti-Taft-Hartley, and it's showing 1933. What's the first thing Hitler did? Break up the labor unions. 47, same thing happened here. So that's an anti-Taft-Hartley. Democrats would say they're opposed to Taft-Hartley for years, but they never did repeal it. So the election of 48 is going to be one of the most controversial and I think one of the most interesting elections in American history. The only ones I think compare, literally like are 1860, 1912, 48, 68. Who knows? I'm not saying the election now won't be important, but kind of is a repeat, isn't it? Truman actually didn't want to run again. He actually didn't want to be president, but he felt he had no choice, and so he jumped in. And his policy would be called the Fair Deal, and it would be to finish the New Deal. So we had the Square Deal, Teddy Roosevelt, the New Deal, the massive New Deal, and now the Fair Deal. That'd be the end of the deals. So Lyndon Johnson, his effort to finish the New Deal would be called the Great Society. John Kennedy's effort to kind of finish it would be called the New Frontier. So what was the Fair Deal? Remember that third New Deal, education. So like the GI Bill, but for every American citizen, and direct aid for K through 12. So basically, the idea would be public tuition would be free for students. So it would be paid by all the United States. Next, national health care insurance. And this one basically ran through the Social Security system. And so it would be the health insurance provided by one body, the United States government. Hospital medical care facilities would be separate, but the insurance would be one place. Health insurance was kind of a brand new thing and becoming very expensive. Now it's really expensive. And then civil rights. And one of the biggest things, and then you have to put a box around and mark this, Truman did something amazing. He ended segregation. He integrated the armed forces by executive order. So the United States Army had been segregated since they allowed for what they called colored regiments back in 1862. And now he integrated it. And there are people you could imagine who would say, it will never work together. Black soldiers and white soldiers can't fight together. And then a lot of black soldiers won't fight. Black officers can't lead. And there'd be great resistance against this. But not only did Truman stand up to it, the United States military today is the most integrated part of the entire United States government and the most integrated element of the entire United States. It's kind of amazing how effective it was. And showed very decisively that, no, actually, worked quite well. Hey, by the way, before you go, how do you think Southern Democrats reacted to this? Especially considering it was a Southern Democrat who did it, Harry Truman. Goodbye, everybody. Oh, no. Well, yeah, everyone has a right to be
Every day.
Yeah, okay. And so he was, yeah, so, yeah, and so they had to register, and then, what year was it? Ask them what year. You're not Tracy. Oh, okay. Oh, is that right? Oh, you're done, okay, don't worry, thank you for doing that. I mean, you had to use pen, but yeah. Find out what year, because I'd be curious to see, because before that, it was like, before 69 was draft balls. Then after 69 was draft the law. So I'm really curious. Oh, if anybody has, no, we might ask everyone.
I have to leave. Okay. No.
European. So European map makers in the 16th century. And they just arbitrarily put a law.
Why do you always skip there?
So they wanted to divide it. So here's even though Europe and Asia was,
What was it?
but it all started, in fact, they just heard about it. So yeah, that's where it started.
The last problem? Okay, so I have the last problem on the second page, you have to split it, right? So you
Huh?
equilateral multiply by square root.
I'm allowed to say.
You have to split it up, right?
Yes.
See, I got like 0.9 something, but then I did it in X's.
What song I was singing? I like it. All right, let me shut this down.